Today we've got a 2002 Acura MDX, and we're going to replace the lower control arm, this arm here, on the passenger front of the vehicle. The reason for that is the ball joint, which is located right here at the bottom of the spindle that connects to the control arm. The ball joint is bad, and also this bushing back here is bad. You can actually see the cracking in the rubber. So we're going to go ahead and replace this and show you how to do it. Okay, so we start with removing the wheel, obviously. Next, now we can access in here, and we have, this is the tie rod. This right here specifically is the outer tie rod, and it bolts to the spindle, which is what all your brakes attach to and your wheel attaches to. But this outer tie rod connects right here, and this is the inner tie rod. So if you ever have to replace those parts, you'll know what they are. They all have sockets on the end, ball sockets. So there's a ball socket on here. This one's okay. You can actually move it and see there's no play. The ball joint, there is play, and this bushing does have play. But we're going to try to not separate this tie rod. It is a little bit easier if you do. You just pull this cotter pin out, pop this 17mm nut off. You separate this tie rod, which you can use a pickle fork. We show that in one of our other videos. Or you can smack it real hard with a hammer just to vibrate it to get it loose. But we're going to try to not take it apart. So once we look in here a little closer, we can see we have the CV axle coming in, and here's the nut to hold that on. And the control arm is just underneath the CV axle. So if you're looking at the top of the CV axle is just above the control arm, just above the ball joint. We need to separate that ball joint, and there's a cotter pin there, so we're going to pull that out, and it's a 19mm nut. Back here, this is the rear bushing of the control arm. It's just a bolt. It's a 19mm bolt. This nut is welded to a bracket that's welded to the frame, so you're never going to get that nut off. If you ever try to put a wrench on it, it's not going to move. Same thing with the front bolt. It's got a bolt that drives into a nut that's welded to a bracket that's welded to the frame. So pay attention, because if you try to take those nuts off, it won't happen. So with that, we'll go ahead and start, and we'll start pulling each one of these out. Okay, so now we're at the ball joint. So this is the lower control arm, the ball joint, the spindle. We have to pull this pin out here, this little pin. You can either put a flathead in like that and just pull it out, or you can put dikes or diagonal cutters on there and grab it and pull it out. Whichever method, it's just a cotter pin kind of thing. It sits on there and locks so the nut doesn't turn. So we get that out of the way. The nut is a 19mm nut, and it's not a lot of room to put a socket on there, so we're going to use wrenches. I'm going to use the closed end of the wrench, and I might have to double wrench it. That's why that's why I have two wrenches here. Of course, I got the wrong. I'm not going to be able to do it with this wrench. If you leave the key in the car and leave it in neutral, you'll be able to move the steering wheel with your hands. You just grab the tie rod and the caliper, and that way you can move it around so you can work the nut. Some cars are more rusty than others. Some bolts come off easier than others, some don't. And you just got to deal with whatever it is you got. Okay, that one's off. Okay, so we got the nut off. Now the ball joint, it's tapered, and the fat bottom part of the ball joint gets wedged into that spindle, and that's what locks it in place. So once you get the nut off, that doesn't come right off. You have to separate it. It's kind of pressed in there. So this is called a pickle fork. This is designed to separate ball joints, and you wedge it in there, and then you got to hit it pretty hard, because you're trying to separate that joint. You can also just hit right on the spindle. If you get good enough hit on it, you can vibrate it enough to separate that without using a pickle fork. If you're trying to protect the boot, for instance, that rubber boot, now we're replacing the whole arm, so we don't care about that rubber boot. I don't care if the pickle fork rips it up. The ball joint's already no good. It's going in the garbage and getting a new one. But if I was just taking this off for some reason, let's say I was taking the CV axle off and not the control arm, well, then I'd be a lot more careful and not want to destroy that rubber. So but for this case, we don't care. So we put it in there. Couple whacks, and you can see it's loose. Okay, now we got the ball joint loose, so now we got to take these other two bolts out. We will use an impact because these suckers are in there good. And when you get the bolts out, I keep them in the same orientation. So I put them on the lift, but I put the rear one in the rear and the front one in the front. I don't like to mix bolts up, and you got to be really careful that you don't ever mix bolts up because one could be a different thread or it could be a different length. So I'll put this on my lift in the rear. Now you might need a pry bar to get it out because it does kind of get stuck in there. But once you get this back side out, it should pretty much fall right off. Okay, so we got our new control arm and we have our old control arm, and you always compare them, make sure they're the same. This is the ball joint. This is a nice new rubber boot. It's already got grease under there. It's got the bushings already pre-installed. This is the front bushing and then the rear bushing, and it looks identical, so we're going to go ahead and throw it into place. And before I tighten anything, I'm going to get all the bolts in. This control arm, it has to be lined up perfectly to get the bolt through to the nut. So you want to don't tighten it all up or it'll make it harder to line those up. Okay, so the ball joint is in place. The front control arm bushing bolt is in. It's lined up, it's ready to be tightened. The back one I cannot get lined up, so I'm going to lower the car down. I'm going to put a jack stand under the control arm, and I'm just going to try and change the angle. If you look at the way the control arm's built and the frame's built, it would be better if the angle was lined up better. That will get. You don't want to strip threads. You don't want to force anything. It should all go in nice and easy, but you got to get the right angle. So I'm going to try and put a jack stand under here, which will push this control arm up and hopefully even this out so I can get the bolt in. The problem's going to be I'm not going to be able to show much on video because it's going to be on the ground. But we're going to try that just to get this back bolt lined up before we put the bolt in. Okay, so we got all the bolts started. We got the back bolt, the front bolt, the ball joint is on, the nuts on it. We did have a little bit of struggle in there because just to line it up. If I was going to do this over again, I would say put the back bolt in first before you mess with either of the other two. It slides in much easier. I did it the hard way the first way and didn't, but learned. So now, if you were to do this job, do this back one first. It'll go quicker. So now we're going to snug these two bolts up. We're going to tighten up the ball joint bolt. We're going to put the cotter pin back in it. We're going to torque the bolts to the proper torque. We'll put the wheel back on it, torque the lug nuts, and then take it for a test drive. We got the control arm at Auto Parts Direct to You. This is the front passenger side. It fits 02 to 08 Acura MDX, and I believe it's the same thing on a Honda Pilot or Honda Element. It's the same exact control arm, same job. So with that, thank you very much. And check out our videos, YouTube/APDTY, and check us out on Facebook, APDTY. Thank you.